On the morning of March 15, 2009, Detective Laura Chen entered the small apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood and immediately noticed the diary. It sat on the desk by the window, open to a page dated 2 days earlier, the handwriting precise and steady. The apartment belonged to 28-year-old Sarah Mitchell, a software engineer at a local tech startup. Sarah had been reported missing by her coworker when she didn't show up for an important presentation she'd been preparing for weeks. That wasn't like Sarah. Everyone said that. She was reliable, organized, meticulous. Detective Chen had learned to pay attention to details that seemed too deliberate. An open diary sitting in plain view in an otherwise pristine apartment felt like an invitation, like someone wanted it to be found. She pulled on gloves and carefully turned back through the pages. What she found would transform a missing persons case into something far more complex and disturbing. Because Sarah Mitchell's diary didn't just document her life, predicted her death. Entry after entry, spanning 6 months, described in chilling detail exactly how she would disappear, who would do it, and why no one would believe her until it was too late. Every prediction in that diary came true. And by the time Detective Chen finished reading, she realized she wasn't just investigating Sarah Mitchell's disappearance. She was following a trail that Sarah herself had left, a breadcrumb path through her final months, written by a woman who knew she was walking toward her own death and documenting every step of the journey. Detective Chen photographed every page before reading them in detail. She needed the evidence preserved exactly as found. Then she sat down and began to read chronologically from September 22, 2008, the first entry in the diary. I'm starting this diary because I need documentation. I need proof that I'm not crazy, that this is really happening. My therapist suggested keeping a journal anyway, but this is different. This isn't about processing feelings. This is about creating a record in case I'm not around to tell the story myself. His name is Marcus Webb. We've been dating for 3 months. Everyone thinks he's perfect for me. Smart, successful, charming. My mother loves him. My friends love him. Even I loved him at first. But something changed 2 weeks ago, and now I'm scared. I'm writing this because I think Marcus is going to kill me. I know how that sounds. I know people will say I was paranoid or dramatic, but I'm going to document everything. Every warning sign, every threat, every moment that made my instincts scream danger. So that when something happens to me, and I think it will, someone will read this and know the truth. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 28 years old. I'm writing this on September 22, 2008. And I believe that within a year, I'll be dead. Detective Chen felt a chill reading those words. Sarah Mitchell had disappeared on March 13, 2009. Just under 6 months after writing that first entry. She flipped ahead through the diary. There were entries almost every day. Hundreds of pages. All of it documenting a relationship that descended from romance into terror. All of it written by a woman who knew she was in danger but felt powerless to escape it. And all of it pointing to one person, Marcus Webb. Detective Chen called for backup and secured the apartment as a potential crime scene. Then she continued reading, taking notes on key details. The early entries painted a picture of a relationship that seemed normal, even ideal. Sarah had met Marcus Webb at a tech industry mixer in June 2008. He was 32, worked in venture capital, came from a wealthy Seattle family. They'd hit it off immediately, bonding over shared interests in hiking, jazz music, and obscure science fiction novels. The first dates were perfect. Thoughtful, romantic, attentive. Marcus remembered everything Sarah told him, surprised her with her favorite foods, sent flowers to her office with handwritten notes that her coworkers swooned over. By August, they were seeing each other exclusively. Marcus met Sarah's family. They were impressed. Her mother pulled her aside and said she'd found a keeper. Her father, typically skeptical of Sarah's boyfriends, approved. Marcus seemed to have everything. Education from Stanford, successful career, came from a good family. He treated Sarah well, or so it appeared. But then came the entry from September 8, 2008, 2 weeks before Sarah started the diary. Tonight, Marcus told me he loved me. We were having dinner at his apartment. It was romantic. Candles, wine, the whole thing. I should have been happy. But something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. Like he was claiming me. Like he'd decided we were forever and I didn't get a vote. When I didn't say it back immediately, his expression changed. Just for a second. The mask slipped, and I saw something underneath that scared me. Anger. Possession. Something cold. Then he smiled and said, "That's okay. You'll feel it soon enough. Not you'll say it. You'll feel it." Like he could control my emotions. Like my feelings were something he could manipulate into being. I laughed it off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd glimpsed something true. Something dangerous. The diary entries documented a rapid escalation. Within days of that dinner, Marcus's behavior changed. He started calling Sarah multiple times a day, wanting to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. When she didn't answer immediately, he'd call her friends and coworkers to find her. He framed it as concern. "I just worry about you," he'd say. "Is that so wrong?" But Sarah felt it as control. September 15th. Marcus showed up at my apartment unannounced tonight. Said he was in the neighborhood and thought he'd surprise me. But I live 20 minutes from his place. There's no reason to be in the neighborhood. He stayed for 3 hours even though I told him I had work to finish. Kept asking about my day, specifically about conversations with male coworkers. Getting details. Then he'd reframe them in sexual ways. "So Tom walked you to your car? That's interesting. Does Tom do that often?" Like he was building a case. When he finally left, I found he'd gone through my phone while I was in the bathroom. My call history was open when I picked it up. I didn't confront him. I was too scared of how he'd react. September 20th. I tried to break up with him today. I told him this wasn't working, that I needed space. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he got very calm, very quiet. He told me I was making a mistake, that I was confused, that I didn't really mean it. He said he knew me better than I knew myself, that he could see I was scared of commitment, but he was patient. He'd wait for me to come to my senses. Then he left, didn't get angry, didn't argue, just decided unilaterally that we weren't breaking up, that my decision didn't count. I'm still his girlfriend whether I agree or not. What made Sarah's diary unusual was that she didn't just document what was happening. She researched. She tried to understand. September 25th. I've been reading about domestic violence and abusive relationships. I never thought of myself as someone who'd be in that situation. I'm educated, independent, strong. But I'm starting to realize that's not how abuse works. It's not about weakness. It's about someone systematically breaking down your reality. Marcus hasn't hit me, but everything I'm reading about psychological abuse, manipulation, control, it all fits. The love bombing at the beginning, the gradual isolation, the monitoring, the way he makes me question my own perceptions. The books say it gets worse. They say the most dangerous time is when you try to leave. They say I need to have a safety plan. But who do I tell? Everyone thinks Marcus is perfect. My mother asks about him every time we talk. My friends say I'm lucky. My coworker Emma said she wished she could find a guy as attentive as Marcus. How do I explain that his attention feels like surveillance? That his devotion feels like ownership? October 3rd. I called a domestic violence hotline today. Used a burner phone I bought with cash because I'm paranoid Marcus somehow tracks my regular phone. I told the counselor everything. She believed me. That was such a relief. Someone believed me. She said I'm right to be scared. She said the fact that he refused to accept the breakup is a major red flag. She gave me information about safety planning, about getting a restraining order. But she also said something that terrified me. She said men like Marcus don't let go easily. That leaving is dangerous. That I need to be very careful. I asked what happens to women in my situation. She didn't answer directly, but the silence told me everything. Where are you right now? What time is it where you're watching this? Drop a comment and let me know. If these kinds of deep dive true crime stories interest you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Now let's continue with Sarah's story. Sarah's diary revealed that she'd developed a plan. She was methodical, strategic, thinking through every detail. October 10th. I've decided I can't just ghost him or get a restraining order. Marcus is too smart for that. He'd find a way around it. I need to create distance gradually. Make him think it's his idea to end things. I'm going to become less interesting, less available. Stop responding to his attempts to control me. Gray rock, they call it. Become boring and unresponsive so he loses interest and finds someone else to fixate on. It's risky, but I think a direct rejection will trigger him. I've seen the anger underneath now. I've seen how he looks at me when I don't do what he expects. Like I'm a malfunctioning appliance that needs to be fixed or replaced. I need to make him want to replace me. October 18th. The gray rock strategy is working, but not the way I hoped. Marcus isn't losing interest. He's escalating. Today he told me he hired a private investigator to check on my safety because he was worried about me. He showed me surveillance photos, pictures of me leaving my apartment, getting coffee, walking to work. He presented this as evidence of how much he cares. See, I make sure you're safe even when you're pushing me away. But it's not safety, it's stalking. He's having me followed. And he told me about it like it was romantic. October 25th. I need to get away from Seattle. That's the only way this ends. I've started looking at jobs in other cities. Boston, Austin, Portland. Anywhere far enough that I can disappear. I've been saving money in a separate account Marcus doesn't know about. I'm documenting everything in this diary. I'm creating a digital backup too, stored in an encrypted cloud account. If something happens to me, someone needs to know. November was when the threats started, though Marcus never called them threats. November 2nd. Marcus let himself into my apartment today while I was at work. I'd taken his key back weeks ago, but apparently he'd made a copy. I came home to find him sitting on my couch. He'd made dinner, set the table. He acted like this was normal. When I told him to leave, when I said he couldn't just break into my apartment, he looked hurt. Break in? Sarah, we're together. I have a right to be here. I told him we weren't together, that I'd broken up with him. He smiled, that same cold smile from before. You don't get to decide that alone, he said. A relationship is two people. I don't agree to break up, so we're not broken up. I didn't know what to say. The logic was insane, but he delivered it so calmly, like it made perfect sense. After he left, I changed my locks. I also found my laptop had been accessed. My email was open to a conversation with a job recruiter in Boston. He knows I'm trying to leave. November 10th. Marcus sent me flowers today. 24 roses, delivered to my office. The card said, "You can't run from us." Not from me, from us, like we're a unit. Like my trying to escape is betraying something larger than just him. My coworker thought it was romantic. He's so persistent, she said. He really loves you. I wanted to scream. This isn't love. This is a cage made of roses. November 18th. He's been following me, not hiring someone, doing it himself. I see his car parked outside my apartment, parked near my favorite coffee shop. Yesterday I saw him across the street from the gym, just standing there, watching. When I confronted him, he denied it, said I was being paranoid, that I was seeing him everywhere because I couldn't admit I still wanted to be with him, making me doubt my own perceptions. Gaslighting. That's what this is. The first physical incident came on November 22nd, 2008. Sarah documented it in detail. He grabbed me today. First time he's been physical. I was leaving a restaurant where I'd had dinner with friends. He was waiting outside, wanted to talk. I said no and tried to walk past him. He grabbed my arm, hard enough to bruise, pulled me close and said, "You need to stop this. Stop pretending you don't want me. Stop trying to leave. It's not going to work." I pulled away and ran. My friends saw it happen. They finally believed me. Emma said she'd go to police with me. But what would I say? He grabbed my arm? They'll say it's a domestic dispute. tell us to work it out, and Marcus will charm them. He always does. I took photos of the bruises. I'm documenting everything. But I don't think documentation will save me. November 28th. I filed a police report today about the grabbing incident. The officer was sympathetic but said without more evidence of ongoing harassment, they couldn't do much. I showed him the flowers, told him about the stalking, the breaking into my apartment. He said a lot of that could be explained as overeager boyfriend behavior. He suggested couples counseling. Couples counseling. With a man who broke into my apartment and has me followed. I know that officer meant well, but the system isn't designed to protect women from men like Marcus. It's designed to give men like Marcus every chance to explain away their behavior until they finally do something so violent that it can't be explained. And by then, it's too late. December 5th. Marcus knows about the police report. I don't know how, but he knows. He called me very calm, very measured. Said he was disappointed. That I'd betrayed him by going to the police instead of working things out. That I'd made things harder for both of us. When I asked what he meant, he said, "Now I have to protect myself. Make sure there's a record of your instability, your paranoia." He's building a counter-narrative, making me look crazy so if something happens, he can point to my mental health issues as an explanation. Marcus systematically worked to isolate Sarah. December 12th. He's been contacting my friends and family, telling them he's worried about me, that I've been acting strange, paranoid, accusing him of things that aren't true. He's so convincing. My mother called today and asked if I was okay. Said Marcus had reached out expressing concern. She asked if I was stressed at work, if maybe I should see my therapist more often. She didn't say the words, but I could hear what she was thinking, that maybe I'm having some kind of breakdown. That Marcus, sweet patient Marcus, is being unfairly accused by me. I tried to explain, but how do you explain that someone's obsession feels dangerous when they've done nothing that sounds dramatic in the retelling? He's following me sounds paranoid. He won't accept our breakup sounds like a guy who's persistent. He broke into my apartment gets reframed as he let himself in because he thought they were still together. Every abusive thing he does gets softened in the retelling, gets explained away, and I end up sounding unstable. December 20th. Emma is the only friend who completely believes me now. Everyone else has backed away. Not aggressively. They're still kind, but distant. I can feel them wondering if I'm reliable. If maybe Marcus is right and I'm just stressed or paranoid. Marcus has successfully isolated me from my support system, made me the unreliable narrator of my own life. December 28th. I'm leaving Seattle. I got a job offer in Boston. I'm taking it. I leave January 15th. I haven't told anyone except Emma. I'm going to disappear, change my phone number, maybe even my name legally once I'm settled. It's the only way. Marcus will be angry when he finds out, but I'll be 3,000 miles away. What can he do from Seattle? January 5th, 2009. Marcus found out about Boston. I don't know how, but he knows. He was waiting outside my apartment building tonight. When I tried to walk past him, he blocked my path. He wasn't violent. That's what makes this so insidious. He was perfectly polite. "Sarah," he said, "I know about Boston. It's not going to happen." I asked what he meant. He smiled. "I mean, if you try to leave Seattle, I'll follow you. I'll find you. Distance doesn't matter. You're mine. You've always been mine. And you always will be." Then he walked away, just like that. A promise delivered calmly in a dark parking lot. A promise I absolutely believe. January 10th. I'm still going to Boston. What else can I do? Stay here and let him control my life forever? I've started packing. I'm shipping boxes ahead to the new apartment I've rented. Small things he wouldn't notice missing from here. Books, clothes, kitchen items. I'll take only what I can carry on the plane. Leave most of my furniture. Abandon this life and start completely over. It feels like witness protection. Going into hiding from someone who's never even been charged with a crime. January 13th. 2 days until I leave. Marcus has been quiet. Too quiet. He's not calling, not showing up, not following me. It's more terrifying than when he was constantly present. Because I know he's planning something. I know him well enough now. The quiet is him thinking, strategizing, figuring out how to stop me. I'm sleeping with a chair under my doorknob, keeping my phone next to me. I have Emma's number on speed dial, but I'm scared, really scared, more scared than I've ever been. January 15th came and went. Sarah didn't leave for Boston. The diary entries explained why. January 15th. I didn't make my flight. At 5 a.m. this morning, someone slashed all 4 tires on my car. The car was parked in a garage with security cameras. I filed a police report. The cameras mysteriously weren't working in the section where my car was parked. By the time I got a ride to the airport, I'd missed my flight. I rebooked for tomorrow. Marcus called this afternoon, asked how my day was going. Casual, friendly, like we were still a couple, like he didn't know about Boston. But I could hear the smile in his voice. He knows. He knows he stopped me today, and he wanted me to know he knows. January 16th. I made it to the airport this morning, got through security, was sitting at the gate. My flight was boarding in 10 minutes. Then airport security came and pulled me aside. They'd received an anonymous tip that I was carrying drugs. They searched everything. Took an hour. Found nothing, obviously. By the time they let me go, my flight had left. And there was Marcus, standing across the terminal. Not hiding. Just standing there where I could see him. Watching. Smiling. He left before I could get security to confront him. I'm back at my apartment now. The door has scratches around the lock like someone tried to pick it. I don't feel safe anywhere. January 20th. I've come to a terrible realization. I can't leave. Marcus won't let me. But also, I can't stay. Living like this, looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next incident. It's destroying me. I'm not sleeping. I'm losing weight. I can barely focus at work. I'm living in a prison of fear, and Marcus is the warden who holds all the keys. I've thought about killing him. I'm writing that down because I need to be honest with myself. I've thought about it. How I might do it. How I might get away with it. Self-defense, right? Except he's never attacked me in a way that would justify lethal force. He's too smart for that. Everything he does lives in the gray area. Threatening but not actionable. Scary but not prosecutable. He's engineered a situation where I can neither escape nor effectively fight back. The only ways out I can see are, he gets bored and moves on to someone else. I kill him, or he kills me, and I'm increasingly convinced it's going to be the third option. January 25th. I told my therapist today that I think Marcus is going to kill me. She took it seriously, thank God. She helped me make a safety plan, gave me numbers for domestic violence resources, suggested I consider leaving the state secretly, not telling anyone, just disappearing one day. But how? Marcus has proven he can find out my plans. He has access to my email, my phone, somehow. He's always one step ahead. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Document everything. Make sure someone knows your story. Because if the worst happens, your voice needs to be heard. That's why I'm keeping this diary. This isn't just for me anymore. This is evidence. This is my testimony from beyond the grave if it comes to that. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button and turn on notifications. This story goes to places you won't expect. Now let's continue. Detective Chun paused in her reading. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize the pattern Sarah was describing. It was textbook escalation of intimate partner violence. Obsession, control, stalking, isolation, increasing threats. And statistically, women who predicted their own murders were right more often than not. She made calls. First to Marcus Webb's last known address. No answer. She sent officers to do a welfare check. Then she called Sarah's mother, who was already frantic. Her daughter had been missing for 3 days now. The last text she'd received from Sarah was on March 11th. Everything is fine. Don't worry about me. Sarah's mother had thought it was odd. Sarah usually called, didn't just text. And don't worry about me implied there was something to worry about. Detective Chun asked about Marcus Webb. Sarah's mother hesitated, then admitted that Sarah had accused Marcus of stalking her, but the family had thought Sarah was overreacting. Marcus had seemed so nice, so concerned about Sarah's welfare. They'd thought Sarah was stressed from work, going through something. Now Sarah's mother was crying, asking if they'd been wrong, if they should have believed Sarah, if their daughter was dead because they hadn't protected her. Detective Chun couldn't answer that. She returned to the diary. The later entries were the most chilling. February 1st, 2009. I've stopped trying to leave Seattle. Every attempt ends in sabotage. My therapist says I need to accept protection where I can find it. She connected me with a domestic violence advocate who's helping me navigate the legal system. But it's so slow. The restraining order application is going through the courts. Marcus has hired an expensive lawyer who's contesting it. Meanwhile, I'm just supposed to live my life while being stalked. The advocate says the system is broken, that it's designed to give men multiple chances, that women often end up dead while waiting for paperwork to be processed. She's seen it happen too many times. She told me to trust my instincts, and my instincts are screaming. February 8th. The restraining order was denied. The judge said there wasn't sufficient evidence of imminent danger. Marcus's lawyer argued that he's simply a jilted boyfriend who's been unfairly accused. The judge believed him, or at least believed him enough to deny me protection. I'm on my own. The system has failed me. Emma says I should go to the press, make this public. But I'm scared that will just escalate things, make Marcus more determined, more dangerous. February 14th. Marcus sent me a Valentine's Day gift, a necklace. Beautiful, expensive. The note said, "Forever yours, whether you like it or not." It's not even subtle anymore. He's openly threatening me, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Emma came to stay with me tonight. She's scared too. She says she'll be a witness to whatever happens, that if Marcus does something, she'll make sure everyone knows. But what good is a witness after I'm already dead? February 20th, 2009. I've been thinking about what happens next. I can't live like this forever. Marcus has made it clear he won't let me go. The system won't protect me. My family doesn't fully believe me. I'm trapped. So I've decided something. I'm going to document everything so thoroughly that if he kills me, there will be no question about who did it. This diary is part of that. But I'm also setting up other things. Digital trails, evidence caches, things that will surface after I'm gone. I'm creating a posthumous investigation kit. So even if I'm not here to testify, my evidence will speak for me. February 28th. I met with a lawyer today, not a criminal lawyer, an estate lawyer. I'm updating my will, creating documents that specify what should happen to my possessions, my digital accounts, everything. More importantly, I'm creating a letter to be opened in the event of my death. A letter that explains everything, that names Marcus, that provides evidence. The lawyer asked if I was in danger. I said yes. He asked if I'd been to the police. I said yes, and they couldn't help. He looked at me with such sadness. I see this too often, he said. Women who know, who prepare, because the system protects abusers until it's too late. He's going to help me set everything up. Make sure that if something happens to me, the truth gets out. March 1st, 2009. I'm going to die this month. I know that sounds dramatic, but I've been documenting Marcus's behavior for 6 months now. I've seen the escalation. I understand the pattern, and I can feel it building to something. He's getting more bold, more open. He doesn't even try to hide the stalking anymore. Yesterday, he was sitting in his car across from my apartment building, just sitting there. When I came out, he waved, smiled, like it was completely normal. I'm not safe, and I don't think I'll make it to April, so I'm writing this as a prediction. When someone reads this diary, after I'm gone, know that I saw it coming, that I tried to escape, that I asked for help, that the system failed me at every turn, and that Marcus Webb killed me. I know he's going to do it. I don't know how or when exactly, but soon, very soon. March 5th. I've given copies of everything to Emma. The diary, digital backups, the letter for my lawyer. If something happens to me, she knows what to do. She's scared. She asked me to leave tonight, to just get in my car and drive, to not tell anyone where I'm going, to disappear completely. But I'm so tired. Tired of running. Tired of being afraid. Tired of fighting a battle I can't win. Whatever happens, at least it will be over. March 10th. 3 days ago, Marcus broke into my apartment again. New locks didn't stop him. He left a single rose on my bed. No note, just a rose. A calling card. A reminder that nowhere is safe. That he can get to me whenever he wants. March 13th, 2009. This is probably my last entry. I can feel it. Marcus has been outside my building all day, just sitting in his car, waiting. Emma wanted to stay with me tonight, but I told her to go home. I don't want her in danger too. I'm writing this at 9 p.m. My doors are locked. I have my phone. I've called the police 3 times today just to have reports on file that he's here. They've done drive-bys but can't arrest him for sitting in his car on a public street. I'm alone in my apartment, knowing he's outside, knowing he's planning something, and there's nothing I can do except wait. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. It means Marcus did what I knew he would do. Please don't say I was paranoid. Don't say I should have tried harder to get help. I tried. God, I tried so hard. The system is designed to protect men like Marcus until they've already killed. And by then, it's too late for justice to matter to me. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Marcus Webb is going to kill me. And I need everyone to know that I saw it coming. That was the last entry. The diary ended there. Detective Chun closed it carefully, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. Every law enforcement officer had cases that haunted them, cases where the system failed, where a victim screamed for help and no one listened until it was too late. This was going to be one of those cases. She could feel it. Detective Chun assembled her team. They had a missing person, a diary that read like a murder confession written by the victim, and a suspect who was about to have a very bad day. Officers were already at Marcus Webb's apartment. He wasn't there. His car, the one Sarah described him sitting in outside her building, was registered to his name but not at his residence. An APB was put out. Within 2 hours, they found the car, parked in a long-term lot at SeaTac Airport. Unlocked. Keys in the ignition. Inside was Sarah Mitchell's phone, her purse, her ID, her credit cards. Everything that would identify her body was left in Marcus Webb's car. But no Sarah, and no Marcus. Detective Chun organized search teams. Sarah's apartment was processed as a crime scene. Luminol showed blood traces in the kitchen. Not much, but enough to indicate someone had been injured there and someone had cleaned it up. The blood type matched Sarah's medical records. Interviews with neighbors revealed that on the night of March 13th, around 11 p.m., someone had heard raised voices from Sarah's apartment. A man and a woman arguing. Then silence. Then sounds of someone moving heavy objects. But this was Capitol Hill. Noise from apartments was common. Nobody had thought to call police. Marcus Webb's financial records showed a cash withdrawal of $10,000 on March 12th. His credit cards showed no activity after March 13th. His phone was turned off. He'd either run or was dead too. Detective Chin believed he'd run. Men like Marcus Webb, narcissists who believed they were smarter than everyone else, they ran when confronted with consequences. The search for Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Webb became a multi-state effort. The FBI was brought in when it became clear Webb had likely fled across state lines. Sarah's diary, now evidence, was transcribed and entered into the record. Painted a damning picture, but it wasn't enough for a conviction. They needed a body. They needed Marcus Webb in custody. They needed forensic evidence that could prove murder, not just disappearance. Days turned into weeks. Search teams combed parks, waterways, and abandoned buildings. Cadaver dogs were deployed. Nothing. It was as if Sarah had simply vanished. Marcus's family hired lawyers immediately. They released a statement saying Marcus was a victim of false accusations, that Sarah Mitchell had been unstable, that she'd made up stories about Marcus to cover her own mental health issues. The statement pointed to the diary not as evidence of her fear, but as proof of her paranoia. Marcus's family suggested she'd probably killed herself and framed Marcus. The victim blaming was immediate and comprehensive. Sarah's family responded with their own statement, released excerpts from the diary, showed the police report Sarah had filed, created a media campaign to keep Sarah's face in public, to pressure law enforcement to find her. Emma, Sarah's friend, gave interviews, described the terror she'd witnessed, confirmed everything in the diary, said she wished she'd done more, wished she'd somehow protected Sarah. But she'd tried. Sarah had tried. Everyone had tried within the bounds of a system designed to fail women in exactly this situation. And now Sarah Mitchell was gone, and Marcus Webb was in the wind. The break in the case came 3 months later, June 2009. A hiker in the Olympic National Forest, about 90 miles from Seattle, found human remains, scattered by animals, partially decomposed, but enough left for identification. Dental records confirmed it was Sarah Mitchell. She'd been buried in a shallow grave, poorly concealed. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Forensic analysis suggested she'd been dead since mid-March, consistent with her disappearance date. The location was remote. The killer would have needed to know the area. Someone outdoorsy, someone comfortable with wilderness. Sarah's diary had mentioned Marcus loved hiking, that they'd gone to Olympic National Forest on dates. He knew this area. The discovery of Sarah's body upgraded the case from missing persons to homicide. The search for Marcus Webb intensified. But he'd had a 3-month head start, and he was smart, the kind of person who could disappear if he wanted to. Months turned into years. Marcus Webb was added to the FBI's most wanted list. Sightings were reported from California to Maine. None panned out. He'd either created a new identity so thoroughly that he'd vanished into normal society, or he'd left the country entirely. Sarah Mitchell's family buried what remained of their daughter. They established a foundation in her name to help domestic violence victims. They pushed for legislative changes to make restraining orders easier to obtain and enforce. They made sure Sarah's story was told, so that her death wouldn't be meaningless, so that maybe the next woman wouldn't be ignored when she said she was in danger. Detective Chun never closed the case. Even as years passed, even as she retired, Marcus Webb remained on her whiteboard, a reminder of failure, of justice delayed so long it became justice denied. But she never stopped believing he'd be found. Subscribe if you're following this story. Hit that like button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Listen to The Rain tonight as we begin a story that has been largely forgotten, buried in old newspaper archives and faded police reports from rural England in 1967. It's a story about a house where nobody ever visited, where curtains remained drawn for years, where neighbors learned not to ask questions. And it's a story about what they found inside when those doors were finally opened. The house stood on Willow Lane in the village of Ashford, Kent. A modest Victorian terrace, red brick weathered by decades of English rain, with a small front garden that had long since surrendered to weeds. Number 47, Willow Lane looked like any other house on the street, except for one detail that neighbors would later tell police they'd noticed but never quite articulated. Nobody ever went in or out. No postman delivered mail. No milkman left bottles. No visitors knocked on the door. The curtains stayed closed, winter and summer, creating a permanent twilight inside that no one from the outside ever saw. For years, this was just the way things were. The house where nobody visited. An oddity, perhaps, but not a concern. Until September 14th, 1967, when the smell began. And with it, a mystery that would haunt the small village and puzzle investigators for decades. Let the rain continue as we go deeper into the story of what happened at 47 Willow Lane. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher lived at number 45, directly next door to the house with no visitors. She was 68 years old in 1967, a widow who spent her days tending her roses and watching the street from her front window. When police interviewed her after the discovery, she told them something that seemed impossible. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen anyone enter or leave number 47. Not in months, maybe not in years. The current residents, she said, were the Morrison family. John Morrison, his wife Margaret, and their adult daughter Claire. They'd lived there since before the war, she thought. Or had it been after? Her memory was unclear, but they kept to themselves. Very private people. Didn't socialize. Didn't cause trouble. You hardly knew they were there. On the other side, at number 49, lived the Hendersons. Robert and Sarah Henderson, both in their 50s. They told police essentially the same story. The Morrisons were quiet, reclusive. They'd occasionally see John Morrison leaving early in the morning, presumably for work. But that was years ago. 5 years? 10? Time has a way of blurring, especially for things that don't seem important. Margaret Morrison they almost never saw. The daughter Claire perhaps once or twice, always hurrying, always avoiding eye contact. The houses on Willow Lane were close together, walls shared, sounds traveling through old brickwork. Yet none of the neighbors could recall hearing anything from number 47. No conversations, no radio or television, no footsteps on the stairs. It was as if the house was empty, though logic suggested people must be living there. After all, the lights were on sometimes at night, visible through the edges of the thick curtains. And the house was maintained well enough from the outside. No broken windows, no obvious decay, just an overwhelming sense of absence. Of a house that wanted to be forgotten. And for years, everyone obliged. The one person who should have had regular contact with number 47 was the postman, Thomas Whitley. He'd been delivering mail to Willow Lane for 12 years. When investigators interviewed him, he provided details that painted a disturbing picture. The letterbox at number 47 was always jammed shut. Not locked exactly, but sealed from the inside with what felt like cloth or paper stuffed into the slot. He'd had to develop a technique for delivering mail, pushing envelopes through with significant force, feeling them drop into some kind of container on the other side. The mail accumulated. He could tell because over time, less and less would fit through the slot. By 1966, he'd essentially stopped trying to deliver to number 47. The bills, the notices, the occasional personal letter, he'd mark them as undeliverable and they'd go back to sender. Nobody ever complained. Nobody ever asked why their mail wasn't getting through. Except there was one curious thing. About once every 6 months, maybe a bit longer, the letterbox would suddenly be clear again. Empty, ready to receive mail. As if someone had finally collected the accumulated pile. And then the cycle would begin again. Whitley mentioned this to his supervisor once. Been told it wasn't their problem if people didn't want to collect their mail. Some people were just like that. Eccentric. As long as there were no complaints, best not to make waves. So he didn't. And the mail situation at 47, Willow Lane became just another oddity of the route. Something to mention to new postmen as a peculiarity but not a problem. Nobody thought to question what kind of life was being lived behind a door that wouldn't accept mail for months at a time. Ashford in the 1960s was a small community where most people knew each other, at least by sight. The local shop, Pearson's General Store, was the hub of village life. Everyone came through eventually to buy groceries, newspapers, tobacco, the essentials of daily living. Mrs. Pearson, who ran the shop with her husband, prided herself on knowing her customers. She knew what they liked, what they needed, who was doing well and who was struggling. But when police asked her about the Morrisons from number 47, she frowned, tried to remember, eventually said she couldn't recall ever serving them. Not recently, anyway. Maybe Margaret Morrison had come in years ago, but the memory was vague, possibly confused with someone else entirely. The daughter Claire, Mrs. Pearson, was more certain she'd never seen. And John Morrison, well, perhaps he shopped elsewhere? People did sometimes go to the larger town nearby for better prices. But it struck her as odd, now that she thought about it. Everyone came into the shop at some point. Everyone. Except, apparently, the family at number 47. Where did they get their food? Their basic supplies? The necessities of life? Mrs. Pearson had no answer. The rain intensifies as we consider this question. A family living in the middle of a village, in a terraced house on a street with other families, yet somehow existing outside the normal patterns of community life. Not shopping, not receiving mail, not being seen. How does a family disappear while staying in plain sight? That question would become central to understanding what happened at 47 Willow Lane. The smell started on a Thursday. Mrs. Fletcher noticed it first, standing in her back garden, wondering if something had died under her shed. A sweet, sickly smell that the September heat intensified. By Friday, other neighbors noticed. The Hendersons thought perhaps their drains were blocked. Another neighbor wondered if rats had gotten into someone's walls and died there. These things happened in old houses. By Saturday, the smell was unmistakable and clearly coming from number 47. Several neighbors stood in the street, handkerchiefs pressed to their faces, discussing what to do. Someone should knock on the door, check if everything was all right. But nobody wanted to be the one. The Morrisons were so private. What if they took offense? What if there was a simple explanation and you looked foolish? Sunday, the smell was worse. Mrs. Fletcher finally telephoned the police. Told them she was worried about her neighbors, that there was a terrible smell and nobody had been seen. Could someone come check? The police constable who arrived that afternoon was young, relatively new to the job. He knocked on the door of number 47. No answer. Knocked again, louder. Waited. Called through the letterbox, though the stuffed slot made that difficult. Finally, he walked around the back. The rear garden was as overgrown as the front. The back door was locked. Windows closed. He peered through a gap in the kitchen curtains. Saw nothing unusual. An ordinary kitchen. Dated but clean. No obvious source of the smell from what he could see. He filed a report. Attempted welfare check. No response. Possible deceased occupant. Recommended follow-up. That recommendation would sit in someone's inbox until Monday morning. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it in your part of the world? Leave a comment and let me know. If you're drawn to these forgotten true crime stories told in the rain, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give this video a like. Now let's continue into the darkness of what they found. Monday morning, September 18th, 2 police officers returned to 47 Willow Lane with authorization to force entry if necessary. The smell had now been reported by multiple neighbors. Whatever was inside needed to be addressed. They knocked. No response. Announced their presence loudly. Stated their intention to enter the property. Then the older officer, Sergeant William Davies, used a crowbar to break the lock on the front door. The door swung open and the smell hit them like a physical force. Both men staggered back, covering their faces. It was the smell of death, unmistakable to anyone who'd encountered it before. But there was something else too. An underlying odor of decay and neglect that went beyond a single dead body. Davies steadied himself and entered. The front hallway was narrow and dark, curtains drawn on the small window by the stairs. He called out again, identifying himself as police. Silence answered. He moved into the front room on the left, drew back the curtains, flooding the space with light, and stopped. The room was frozen in time. Furniture from the 1930s, perhaps earlier. Everything covered in a thick layer of dust, but arranged as if people had been living there recently. A tea set on the side table. Newspapers from 1953 on a chair. A woman's cardigan draped over the armrest of the settee. And something else. The smell was stronger here. Davies looked around more carefully. Noticed that one of the armchairs was facing away from the window, toward the fireplace. Walked around it, and there sat Margaret Morrison, dead for what a pathologist would later determine was approximately 3 weeks, still dressed in a nightgown, sitting upright in her chair as if she'd simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed. Except for the state of decomposition, She looked almost peaceful. Sergeant Davies immediately radioed for backup and a police surgeon, sealed the house as a potential crime scene. But before help arrived, he needed to check if there were others. The Morrisons were supposed to be 3 people: mother, father, daughter. He'd found the mother. Where were the others? The kitchen revealed nothing except extreme age. Appliances from the 1940s that looked functional but showed no signs of recent use. A tin of tea on the counter. Cups hanging from hooks, dusty and unused. The sink was dry, a faint smell of mildew from the drain. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The first bedroom was clearly the main room. A double bed, neatly made with old linens. Wardrobe containing men's and women's clothing, styles from decades past. But no body. The second bedroom was smaller. A single bed. Women's clothing in this wardrobe, younger styles but still outdated. A dressing table with a hairbrush that held gray hairs. Photographs in frames showed a young woman from the 1930s or 40s. Claire, presumably. No body here either. The third bedroom was filled with boxes. Storage. Items that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Davies descended the stairs, checked the small dining room. Empty except for a table set for 3. Plates laid out. Cutlery positioned properly. Glasses at each setting. Waiting for a meal that would never be served. He was beginning to think perhaps Margaret Morrison had lived alone, that the husband and daughter had left long ago, when he noticed the cellar door under the stairs. It was locked from the outside with a simple bolt. He slid the bolt open and the smell intensified immediately. He called down. No response. Descended the narrow stairs into darkness, using his torch to light the way. And there he found John Morrison. The cellar was small, damp, with stone walls and a concrete floor. It had been converted into living space, though calling it living was generous. A camp bed against one wall. A bucket in the corner. Shelves containing tins of food, some opened, some not. A small camping stove. And sitting on the floor against the wall, knees drawn up to his chest, was John Morrison. He'd been dead longer than his wife, possibly months. The state of decomposition was advanced. He was dressed in trousers and a shirt, both filthy. Near his body were empty food tins, a glass that had contained water, now knocked over and dry, and something that made Davies's blood run cold. Scratches on the inside of the cellar door. Desperate, clawed marks where someone had tried to get out. John Morrison hadn't died peacefully in his sleep like his wife. He'd been locked in this cellar. And he died trying to escape. The implications were immediate and terrible. This wasn't a case of an elderly woman passing away naturally. This was something else entirely. Something that suggested imprisonment, possibly murder. But by whom? Davies radioed for detective support. This was now definitely a crime scene. As he waited for the investigation team to arrive, he sat outside in the rain that had begun to fall, trying to process what he'd seen. 2 bodies, both long dead. Both in a house that neighbors swore nobody had entered or left for years. And still one person missing. Claire Morrison, the daughter. Where was she? The detective team arrived within the hour, led by Detective Inspector Arthur Ross, a veteran of 25 years with the Kent Police. He conducted his own walkthrough of the property, documenting everything, photographing the bodies in situ before they were removed to the morgue. The more he saw, the less sense it made. The house was like a museum of the past. Calendars on walls stopped at different years. One showed 1953, another 1948. Clocks had stopped at various times. Nothing electrical seemed to work when tested. The power to the house had apparently been disconnected years ago, though nobody could say exactly when. The gas was disconnected too. No utilities at all. Yet someone had been living here. The camping stove in the cellar proved that. The tins of food, some recently opened based on their condition. Someone had been here alive until recently. The search for Claire Morrison expanded. Officers checked every room, every cupboard, every space large enough to conceal a body. They found her clothing, her possessions, photographs of her at various ages. But no Claire. The back garden was searched. No signs of digging. No indication anyone was buried there. Neighbors were interviewed again more thoroughly. Did anyone ever see Claire Morrison? When was the last confirmed sighting? The answers were frustratingly vague. Someone thought maybe 5 years ago. Another neighbor remembered seeing a woman who might have been Claire in 1960. But nobody was certain. The rain continues as we consider the mystery deepening. 2 bodies found. 1 person missing. A house that existed outside normal society. And no clear explanation for any of it. The post-mortem examinations provided some answers and raised more questions. Margaret Morrison, the pathologist determined, had died approximately 3 to 4 weeks before discovery. The cause appeared to be natural, likely heart failure, though malnutrition had contributed. She was severely underweight, showing signs of long-term dietary deficiency. Her body showed no signs of violence. No wounds, no trauma. She'd simply died, sitting in her chair, and her body had remained there, decomposing slowly in the sealed house. John Morrison's autopsy was more disturbing. He'd been dead for approximately 4 to 6 months. Cause of death was determined to be a combination of dehydration and starvation. His stomach contained remnants of tinned food, but not enough. The scratches on his hands matched the marks on the cellar door. He'd tried desperately to escape. Time of death was estimated to be sometime in early spring 1967, possibly March or April. But here was the crucial question that the pathologist posed to Inspector Ross. If John Morrison died in the spring, and Margaret Morrison died in September, who had been caring for Margaret during those intervening months? She couldn't have been feeding herself. She was found in the front room, but the food was in the cellar. Someone had been bringing her food, minimal as it was. Someone had been in that house, keeping Margaret alive, while her husband's body decomposed in the locked cellar below. The only person unaccounted for was Claire Morrison. But where was she? And if she'd been caring for her mother until September, where had she gone? And why leave her mother's body sitting in a chair? Inspector Ross assigned officers to trace the financial history of the Morrison family. Bank accounts, pensions, employment records, anything that might explain how they'd been living. What they found was a portrait of gradual withdrawal from normal society. John Morrison had worked as a clerk for a shipping company until 1952. He'd retired at age 58, unusual for the time. His employment file noted he'd become increasingly erratic, missing work, making errors. The company had encouraged early retirement. Margaret Morrison had never worked outside the home. No employment records existed for her. Claire Morrison had worked briefly as a shop assistant in the late 1940s. That employment had ended in 1951. After that, no record of her working anywhere. John's pension had been deposited into a bank account monthly until 1962. At that point, the bank records showed the account had been closed and the funds withdrawn in cash. A significant sum, several years of accumulated pension payments. After 1962, no official source of income existed for the family. Bills for utilities showed they'd been disconnected for non-payment in 1963. Gas first, then electricity, then water. Yet neighbors insisted they'd seen lights in the house after 1963. How? Candles, perhaps, or torches. The rates for the house, the property taxes, had gone unpaid since 1964. Legally, the council should have pursued recovery, potentially even seizure of the property. But somehow the Morrison house had fallen through bureaucratic cracks. Notices sent but never delivered because the letterbox was stuffed. No one following up. A family existing in the gaps of an administrative system. Living on what? The cash from 1962 wouldn't have lasted forever. How had they fed themselves? Where had the tins of food in the cellar come from? In the main bedroom, investigators found a small wooden box under the bed. Inside were 3 journals, handwritten in different handwriting styles. The first was clearly John Morrison's writing, dating from 1947 to 1953. It detailed his growing paranoia, his belief that neighbors were watching him, that his employers were conspiring against him. He wrote about protecting his family from an unnamed threat, about the importance of privacy, about how the outside world had become dangerous. The entries became increasingly erratic. By 1952, he was writing about keeping the family safe by cutting off contact with the outside. No visitors. No unnecessary leaving of the house. They would be self-sufficient. They would be safe. The second journal was Margaret's, though her entries were fewer and more sporadic. She wrote about trying to reason with John, about wanting Claire to have a normal life, about feeling trapped. In 2015, a researcher named Dr. Sarah Mitchell became interested in the Morrison case while studying historical instances of fatal family isolation. She petitioned to have any remaining physical evidence re-examined using modern forensic techniques. The police had retained a few items in storage: Claire's journals, some of the photographs, samples of hair from the bodies. DNA analysis was performed on the hair samples, establishing genetic relationships that confirmed the bodies were indeed John and Margaret Morrison. Their remains, long since buried in unmarked council graves, contained no surprises. But analysis of the journals proved more interesting. Ink dating suggested the entries were written over the time periods claimed. Handwriting analysis using computer-aided comparison confirmed 3 distinct writers. No evidence of forgery. Paper fiber analysis found traces of blood on one page of Claire's journal. Her blood type, determined from a medical record found during the original investigation. The blood was on the page dated August 30th, 1967, an entry where Claire wrote about cutting her hand while opening a tin. Small details that confirmed the authenticity of the journals but brought investigators no closer to finding Claire. Dr. Mitchell also attempted to track Claire Morrison through modern genealogical databases and missing persons records. She found nothing. If Claire had children or descendants, they weren't in any searchable database. If she died and been buried, it wasn't under her own name. The trail remained cold, 50 years colder now than when it started. Modern technology, for all its advances, couldn't find a woman who'd disappeared into the margins of 1960s Britain. In researching her book on the case, Dr. Mitchell interviewed some of the original neighbors from Willow Lane, those still living. Now in their 80s and 90s, they carried a weight of guilt that had never fully lifted. Mrs. Fletcher, who'd made the initial call to police, said she'd asked herself 1,000 times why she hadn't acted sooner, why she'd accepted the strangeness of number 47 as just an oddity rather than a red flag. She'd known something was wrong. Everyone had known. But knowing and acting are different things, and the social norms of the 1960s didn't encourage interference in other people's business. Robert Henderson, from number 49, told Dr. Mitchell he still had nightmares. Dreams where he heard sounds from next door that in the dream he recognized as calls for help. But in reality, he'd heard nothing. The house had been silent. Had Claire or Margaret called out, banged on walls, screamed for help? Or had they been too afraid of John Morrison, too beaten down, too accepting of their imprisonment to even try? The guilt extended beyond the immediate neighbors. The postman Thomas Whitley, retired by the time Dr. Mitchell interviewed him in 2016, spoke with tears in his eyes. He'd known that letterbox was stuffed deliberately. He'd known mail wasn't being collected. He should have reported it. Someone should have followed up. But he'd been told it wasn't his problem, and he'd accepted that too easily. The shop owners, the police who'd driven past the house countless times, the utility companies that had disconnected services without investigating why a family would simply stop paying, the council officials who'd let property tax arrears accumulate without enforcement. Everyone had played a small part in the bureaucratic and social failure that allowed the Morrison family to disappear into their house and die there unseen. The rain continues its steady rhythm as we consider this collective failure. How many other houses exist even today where isolation and suffering occur behind closed curtains while neighbors and officials look the other way? Chapter 22. Similar cases. The Morrison case, while extreme, wasn't entirely unique. Dr. Mitchell's research uncovered several similar instances of fatal family isolation in post-war Britain. In 1952 in Leeds, a widow and her 3 children were found dead in their home, having starved over several months while neighbors assumed they'd moved away. In 1971 in Manchester, an elderly couple was discovered deceased, having lived without power or water for over a year before dying of exposure during a harsh winter. Nobody had checked on them. In 2001 in London, a man's body was found in his flat where he'd been dead for 3 years. Bills had been paid automatically from his account, so nobody noticed his absence. His neighbors had simply assumed he'd moved. These cases shared common elements with the Morrison tragedy: social isolation, gradual withdrawal from community, systems failure, and often mental health issues that went unrecognized and untreated. But the Morrison case remained unusual in its scale and duration. 3 people, locked together in declining horror for over a decade. One possibly escaping, possibly dying, never found. It represented an extreme of how thoroughly people could vanish while technically remaining in place. Dr. Mitchell argued in her book that these cases reflect broader social failures: the erosion of community bonds, the bureaucratization of care that allows people to fall through cracks, the stigma around mental illness that prevents intervention, the assumption that privacy trumps welfare checks. Modern Britain, she noted, has more surveillance than ever: CCTV cameras everywhere, digital tracking of purchases and movements, yet people still die alone in their homes, undiscovered for months or years. Technology doesn't replace human connection and genuine community care. In 2019, a woman contacted Dr. Mitchell claiming to be Claire Morrison. She was 73 years old, living in Cornwall, and said she'd seen a television documentary about the case that had prompted her to come forward. Her story was compelling. She said she'd left the house in September 1967 after her mother died. She'd walked to Dover, taken a train to London, and disappeared into the homeless population there. She'd lived on the streets for years, eventually getting help from a charity that found her housing and got her identification under a new name. She'd never contacted police because she was terrified of being charged with her father's death. She'd locked him in that cellar and left him there. She was guilty, she believed, even if it had been self-defense. The claim generated significant media attention. DNA testing was arranged. Samples from the woman who claimed to be Claire were compared with DNA extracted from hair samples in the journals and from Margaret Morrison's remains. The results came back. No match. The woman was not Claire Morrison. Further investigation revealed she was a troubled individual with a history of inserting herself into famous cases. She'd previously claimed to be other missing persons. She genuinely seemed to believe her own stories, confabulating detailed memories that felt real to her but had no basis in fact. It was a disappointment but not entirely surprising. High-profile missing persons cases often attract such false claims. The real Claire Morrison, if she was still alive, would be in her 90s. More likely she died decades ago, somewhere, somehow unidentified. The rain grows softer now, as we near the end of this tale without resolution. Current residents of 47 Willow Lane know nothing of its history. The house has been renovated multiple times. Extended, modernized, made unrecognizable from its 1967 state. A young family lives there now, 2 children, happy and healthy, unaware that decades ago other people suffered and died within these same walls. But sometimes, the current owner told a local historian in 2022, sometimes late at night she hears things. Footsteps on stairs that have been replaced. Doors closing in rooms that have been reconfigured. A smell, just briefly, of something old and decayed, though the house has been thoroughly cleaned and updated. She doesn't believe in ghosts, but she acknowledges the house has an atmosphere, a weight, something that lingers in the spaces between the walls. Neighbors on Willow Lane are a mix now. Some elderly residents who remember 1967, though they rarely speak of it. New families who know nothing of the history. The street is pleasant, well-maintained, ordinary in every way, except for those who know to look closely, to see the small memorial plaque placed by the council in 2017 on the 50th anniversary of the discovery. In memory of John, Margaret, and Claire Morrison, who lived and died at this address, 1967. May they find peace. The plaque says nothing of how they lived, nothing of the horror of their final years, nothing of the mystery that remains unsolved. Just names and a date and a hope for peace that may or may not exist for the dead. As the rain begins to fade, we're left with questions that will likely never be answered. What really happened to Claire Morrison? Did she die somewhere, her body never identified? Did she escape into a new life, living under a false name, carrying her secrets to a grave that won't bear her real name? If she lived, did she find peace? Or did the trauma of those years in the house with no visitors destroy her capacity for a normal life? We don't know. We'll probably never know. The case remains officially open but inactive. Claire Morrison is still listed as a missing person in police databases. Her photograph, decades out of date, still sits in files somewhere. But no investigator actively searches for her. The likelihood of finding her alive is essentially zero. The likelihood of finding her remains after this much time is nearly as small. What we're left with is a story. A dark story about isolation and mental illness. About a family that disappeared in plain sight. About systems and communities that failed to see suffering happening right in front of them. And about the human capacity to endure unimaginable circumstances until endurance is no longer possible. The Morrison case teaches us to pay attention, to notice when neighbors disappear, when mail piles up, when curtains stay closed, to overcome social reluctance and check on people who seem isolated. Because behind closed doors anywhere at any time someone might be suffering. Someone might need help they can't ask for. And if we don't notice, if we don't act, we become part of their tragedy. The house with no visitors is not just 47 Willow Lane in Ashford, Kentucky. It's a metaphor for all the isolated suffering that occurs unseen in every community. For the people who fall through cracks. For the failures of connection that allow preventable tragedies to unfold. Thank you for listening to this forgotten case in the rain. If it moved you, if you believe these stories matter, please subscribe to this channel. Give this video a like. Share it with others who appreciate true crime told with respect for the victims. Turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into cases that deserve to be remembered. And most importantly, if you know someone who seems isolated, who might be struggling behind closed doors, reach out, check on them, be the person who notices. Because the worst tragedies are the ones that could have been prevented if only someone had paid attention. The rain has stopped now, but the story of the Morrison family continues to haunt those who know it. A reminder that sometimes the most horrifying things happen not in dark alleys or remote locations, but in ordinary houses on ordinary streets, hidden only by our collective willingness to look away. Good night, and may you never live in a house with no visitors.